So today we're going to do a writing exercise based on the most recent score study video. So if you haven't seen the most recent score study video, go check that out before you watch this one. What we're going to do is we're going to take the principles of orchestration that we learned from Ligeti in the most recent score study video, and we're going to apply it to one of my earliest compositions. This is my first piano sonata. It was written a long time ago, but I think it will translate well to Woodwind Quintet. And so that's what we're going to do today. So let's go ahead and familiarize ourselves with this theme. Okay, so that is the theme, and you can see that there are basically two ideas happening, and we have this left hand rhythmic harmonic sort of thing going on, and then we have our melody in the right hand. So pretty simplistic. What we want to do with that is we want to orchestrate it for these 5 instruments, which are collectively known as a woodwind quintet. The 5 instruments of a woodwind quintet, if you're not familiar with it, are flute, oboe, clarinet, horn, and bassoon. And you'll notice that I've got everyone in concert pitch so that you're not having to transpose on site as you watch this video. I thought that was very nice of me. So the first point that we made about orchestration in the Ligeti video was that orchestration is about the integrity of the original. So as we look to translate this to Woodwind Quintet, we're looking to stay as faithful as possible to this source material, which means I'm mostly going to be copying and pasting. Because the goal here is not to create a new musical work, it's to translate the source material into a different set of instruments. So this left-hand figure here is really only possible in the bassoon and the horn. So here we're not trying to be terribly creative, we're just trying to be practical. The instruments that have the best chance of playing these notes faithfully are the bassoon and the horn, so we'll give it to them. And that's going to be the case for the entire first part of the theme. So we'll just go ahead and copy and paste the entire left hand into the horn and the bassoon. One change that I am going to make is that the piano score has got octaves the whole way through, but I would kind of like to ramp up into the theme. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to just give it to the horn at first, and then the horn and the bassoon can play together the second time. They're in octaves, so I think that's going to sound more effective than them both playing both times. So let's take a listen to how that sounds. Yeah, so nothing spectacular. We're just doing what makes the most sense. The second point that we made in the Ligeti video was that we wanted to maximize our use of color, because in the piano, we basically have one color, that's the piano, but in the Woodwind Quintet, we have essentially 5 colors of the 5 different instruments. Obviously, different instruments can play different sorts of ways, but let's just consider that each instrument is a color. So we have 5 colors total to work with, so let's maximize our use of that. And what that's going to mean here is that I want this melody, this theme, to be passed around between the other 3 instruments that are not playing the left-hand figure, so the flute, the oboe, and the clarinet. And I think I'm going to go oboe, clarinet, flute, and we'll just see how that sounds. Sometimes this is a game of trial and error, and so we're going to try this, and if we don't like it, we can always change it. So again, we're looking to stay as faithful to the source material as possible. Even though we have more instruments to work with does not necessarily mean that we need to add more things for those instruments to do. And so what we're going to do here is we're actually going to just leave certain instruments on rests for certain measures so that they can all work together to portray the source material. All right, so let's see how we like that. So I think that this works, and I really like giving the second phrase to the clarinet because of the fact that it's lower than the other 2 phrases. One thing I do want to add here is accents on the downbeats. So we're not going to give the other instruments too terribly much to do. I just do think that it would be more effective to come into that downbeat. We have those 3 pickup notes from the horn and the bassoon, and I think it would be a more effective downbeat if we added accents right there. So we're just going to maintain the octaves. So it's just going to be F sharp and then C sharp and then F sharp again. But I think adding those on the downbeat is going to make a much stronger downbeat than just the horn and the bassoon. So let's go ahead and add those. And that's going to be in the two instruments that are not playing the theme at that moment. That's really the first half of the theme. The second half of the theme, we have something a little bit different that happens. So let's go back and we'll remind ourselves of what that second half sounds like. Okay, so we've talked so far about staying faithful to the source material and maximizing our use of color, and we'll continue to keep those in mind. But with this half of the theme, we have the opportunity to talk about the third point that we made last time, and that's to orchestrate the gesture. And what we said was that that means that the instruments are going to work together to create a single musical idea rather than each of them just sort of doing their own thing. And so the musical idea that's being presented here is we have the two half notes there in measure 22, and then we have quarter notes in the melody. And so what that creates is a strong first and third beat and then a weaker second and fourth beat. With the piano, the mechanics of it means, because it's a vibrating string, that as soon as you attack the key, it immediately starts decaying. And so half notes here make sense because we have an attack and then a decay and then an attack and then another decay. But with woodwind instruments, we don't have that immediate decay because we're dealing with air flowing through the instrument rather than a string vibrating. And so we're going to have to create this effect in measures 22 and 23. We're going to have to create that effect through orchestration. And so here's how we're going to do that. We're going to take our melody, that right hand, and we're going to double it to reinforce it. And I'm going to put that in the flute and in the clarinet. And the one change I'm going to make is I'm going to make it in octaves rather than just a straight doubling at the unison. Two reasons for that. One, I think it strengthens the melody at that point, but also because the flute is not great in its lower range when there are other instruments involved. And so doing it at octaves will give the flute a much better chance of being heard. All right, so now that we've got the melody taken care of, I want to look at the left hand for a second. Like we said, there are those half notes, but we need to create that with our woodwind instruments. And so we have a strong first beat and a strong third beat, and then we need to make sure that our second and fourth beats aren't as strong. And so the way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to leave the bassoon playing half notes, but then what I want from the horn and from the oboe is just beats 1 and 3. And that's going to create an effect where beats 1 and 3 are stronger because there are more instruments playing, and beats 2 and 4 are weaker because there are less instruments playing. So that's what we have for those two measures. Let's go ahead and take a listen to that. So we have a crescendo from piano up to fortissimo, and we've orchestrated the gesture of strong first and third beats and weak second and fourth beats, but I think we could orchestrate that dynamic change a little bit better as well. And the way that I'm going to do that is I'm actually going to take the oboe and the flute out of that first part, and that way we have an actual crescendo created by instruments rather than just dynamic markings. Here's what that change would sound like. Yeah, so you see that does a much better job of portraying that crescendo from piano to fortissimo because we have orchestrated the gesture, and the gesture is the crescendo. So the last thing that we need to tackle is the descent into this half cadence here. And there's two different ways that I want to tackle it to show you a couple of different options and why one of them works better than the other. So first, I'm just going to go ahead and copy our melody there into the Woodwind Quintet version. So the first thing that I want to try is to involve all 5 instruments in this descent. And so that's going to mean that I'm going to split up these 16th note figures between the instruments, starting up here at the flute, and we'll descend all the way down into the bassoon. All right, so this is what that would sound like broken up with all of these different instruments. Okay, so that sounds pretty cool because we've got all of those different colors that are interacting with each other. A couple of things here, and this is the one, spoiler alert, that does not work as well. So I think that this is a pretty light figure in terms of it's sort of bouncy. It's very, there's a lot of motion to it, and we're descending into a cadence. You see we have the diminuendo marked there as well. That's why I think the horn does not really fit as a participant in this gesture, because the horn is a much heavier instrument and it might work in a different context, but I don't think that it works here. The second reason has less to do with the instruments themselves and more to do with the source material that we are missing. So you can see in the piano score that we have something happening in the left hand, which we would not be capable of doing if we had all 5 instruments involved, mostly because what's happening in the left hand can really only be played by the bassoon and the horn. The clarinet could be involved, but I think it's more effective when it's down an octave. So if you look at the piano's left hand, the upper voice in the piano left hand is mostly G sharp. There's an A at the beginning of measure 25, and then the upper voice is a C sharp in measure 26, but the G sharp is still present. And so what that means is that we could have a pedal point. And the reason there's not a pedal point in the piano version is because of what we've already talked about. The piano immediately starts decaying the second that you attack the string. And so if I had put a whole note G sharp in measure 24, then you would maybe hear it to the end of that measure at most. But in order for it to continue to be heard, you have to continue to re-articulate it, especially because we have that moving bass line. If this was written for an organ, yeah, for sure, I could have just written whole notes there and the G sharp would have continuously be heard. But as it stands, I had to re-articulate it, and I don't think that that's going to be the most effective way of presenting this material in a woodwind quintet arrangement. So what that means is I can have someone hold out that G sharp, and I think that that someone is going to be the bassoon. So what that means for this material is that I need to give it back to the other 3 members, the flute, the oboe, and the clarinet. And to keep the spirit of them passing it back and forth, I think that we'll go with that right there. We'll give the oboe 2 in a row and then the clarinet 2 in a row. I think that we're getting a little bit low for the flute at that point. You may disagree with me. But let's go ahead and get that pedal there for the bassoon on that G sharp down an octave. Which means the other thing that we have is the lower voice in the piano part, which is this moving bass line, where it just ascends from C sharp to F sharp, and then it descends its way back down into that cadence. So pretty easy there. We can give that to the horn. This is a really good spot for the horn to have some moving material. It's in contrast to the rapid moving 16th notes of the upper 3 instruments, and it's in contrast to the long held note of the bassoon. And because it's quarter notes, it can be a little bit heavier. It can afford to be heavier, as opposed to the necessity of the upper parts to be light and quick. All right, so the last thing that I want to look at is this cadence here. We come into an implied half cadence. I actually did not include a third. You'll notice it's just C sharps and G sharps. So is it a natural minor? Is it a harmonic minor like it has been in other places? I left that uncertain. I can't remember why, but I think it's effective. But the thing that we're looking at here is the gesture, regardless of what I intended. so many years ago. We're looking at the gesture, which is this diminuendo into the cadence. And again, we're going to accomplish that by removing instruments to reinforce the piano dynamic marking. So with the piano, I have 4 voices. I don't think that we need that many to effectively portray this gesture. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to go with the clarinet, and I'm not even sure that we need the G sharp. I think if I was to just add a C, we'll knock that down an octave. We'll knock that down an octave for the bassoon. And so now, once again, we have created a diminuendo just by our use of number of instruments. So again, the 3 things that we were looking at here was 1, to stay faithful to the source material, 2, to maximize our use of the colors, and 3, to orchestrate the gestures so that our woodwind quintet works together. They complement each other to create one musical idea. So all that being said, let's hear the whole thing that we have just done. We'll start with the piano as our source material, and then I'll play the woodwind quintet one more time. And then the woodwind quintet. So there you go. That is how I would translate a solo piano work into a woodwind quintet using the 3 principles that we learned last week looking at Ligeti's Ricercata. Of course, if you have not seen that score study video, you should go check it out. The link is in the description. And if you would like a free copy of the score study field guide, the link is in the description as well. Make sure to let me know in the comments what you'd like to see me analyze next, and I'll see you next time.